my alignment with the Department of Justice released some a memorandum to federal agencies on July 29th that states, here are the things that you can't do and still get federal funding. And like, I think 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 7 of those things are all precedent in my case, but I've got a link to the suit and everything like that, so you kind of know what's going on. But yeah, I think this is an uncertain time for Illinois institutions. It's a fundamental shift in the idea, in the interpretation of civil rights law. I would say that the shift that is happening is a lot more attuned to the original intent of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, colorblind equality, not how it's evolved over time because of things like disparate impact and other sort of, lawsuits and doctrines that have been, some informal doctrines that have been, that just have allowed people to operate with impunity, and frankly, a lot of this stuff has just flown under the radar. It wasn't on any websites. There aren't that many Republicans in higher education administration. They weren't aware of a lot of these programs and stuff that I've been highlighting in my suit. So yeah, I think it's a fundamental change, and things are going to get better, but there's definitely some pain in the interim, and I think that you should have you should have a high degree of trust in Harvey Dillon and this new administration.
A return to, fairness in admissions, fairness in hiring. I'd say just a super quick summary. I've heard it called this period that we from 2014 until we're in now, or just ended at the beginning of the Trump administration, was kind of known as the Great Awakening, and essentially a combination of whistleblowers, federal statistics that are compiled by the institutions, and FOIA documents by journalists are showing that, like, if you were, essentially, particularly if you're white males or some Asian communities, it was almost impossible to get into medical school, into law school, into doctoral programs. You were not hired as a faculty member. You were not promoted. A lot of people like myself were pushed out. It was just, it was a coup. It was a takeover of the American education system, and it had been building for a while, and it kind of exploded in the last 10 years.
Stefan, can I ask you a question real quick?
I think this, yeah. I'm sorry?
Yeah, can I ask you a question? The April 2025 funding freeze of $790 million, do you think Northwestern should actually be getting federal funding in the tune of $790 million when we're $35 trillion in debt?
I mean, I think if the value's there, this is a hold. I can't speak as to what sort of concessions they're going to have to make. The Attorney General and Assistant Attorney General, and I believe the chair of the Equal Opportunity Commission, EEOC, they've primarily been targeting institutions like Harvard, Northwestern, Stanford, Brown, not only for discriminatory hiring and admissions, but also for anti-Semitism, and I think that's the crux of the I believe the anti-Semitism thing is what that's kind of Northwestern's on the hook on, but I don't know what the settlement's going to look like. I agree with you that our debt and our spending are kind of out of control. I think that changes in some federal programs. Another big part of this great awakening is that the Biden administration purposely inserted DEI requirements into a lot of federal grants. This was the National Institutes of Health, NSF. I served on an NSF panel. I sat there in the deliberations where people just tried to punch up obviously really poor grant proposals because they came from certain institutions that for diversity and stuff like that. So I think that there's a push to help contain the costs and address the deficit that they're having, but from the Biden administration, particularly from 2021 until this year was just a free-for-all that just employed entire classes of people who were basically political activists using federal funds. So I think it's a good start, if you will.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Stephen. I see a few other speakers have come up. Hey, Kyle, Jay Laz. Feel free to ask any questions for Stephen or anything else that you need to bring up. If anybody else wants to come up and has any questions, then please send me a request and I'll get you up here. Stephen, just one last question for you from my side is that I think Illinois, all the universities and colleges have gone to, instead of standardized test scores, optional to required now. I'm correct, right?
I'm not sure. I know that a lot of institutions have relaxed those requirements for a while. I know that like SATs and even GREs and stuff like that.
Right, so like it all started with COVID, and I think it was nothing to do with really COVID. They had a tougher time justifying the preferred admissions that they wanted if the scores were submitted, right? And that's why they said, they kind of like did away with it. And I think it was the worst thing to do, when you're telling kids that these scores aren't required, kids, maybe some kids really still, took the tests and excelled at those tests, but there's so many kids who just didn't care about those tests that were highly valued, for all this time. But I think a lot of the institutions have gone back to those now, and I'm wondering if that could be held, held up against them for biased admissions.
I know what you're talking about, because like I believe like Harvard and Yale, they did the same thing. They're like, oh, we're just going to rely on high school GPA, that SATs and other standardized tests are inequitable and all that other stuff like that. And then, like, I believe they said like a third of the entering class of freshmen in either 2024 or 2023, like, had problems doing like advanced high school.
Hit that like button.
algebra
I can't believe there's 20, 35 people watching this. We are on X Spaces doing a conversation called Make Illinois Great Again.
In its entirety.
Week 34. Go to John Kitover, Illinois on X. It's John, Joey Chen, Kitover, IL.
9% of students are doing math at grade level, 12% are reading at grade level, but the graduation rate is, I forgot, it's like 90% or something like that. And it's like, you think about it, like, well, obviously there's some social promotion. There's just something about that's, when you remove kind of objective means of assessing people's potential for study, and then that just, it's not a great way, high school GPA, based on the politics of K-12 education and the people who are willing to pass people without having competency and stuff like that, it's not a great way of working up. I know that another kind of alternative movement, because people are looking for new ways to do stuff, I think Northwestern has proposed doing an alternative where they do, they have students get into like focus groups where they have to discuss some sort of topic, and they have peer evaluations of each other. And I can tell you from teaching program evaluation and stuff like that, like that's a terrible idea. First of all, a high school student knows nothing about actual evaluation and fairness. The research shows that there is a tremendous intra and extra group bias between particularly different ethnic groups, where they tend to systematically downvote certain groups and systematically upvote themselves in ways that are really harmful. So I see that there's kind of this movement to, by a number of educational institutions, to avoid having to try to go back to sort of objective measures, which they feel will disadvantage kind of, hurt the ability for them to ensure diversity within their populations or just student populations and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of weird kind of changes that are going on now in higher education, and I can't say I understand it all myself, but that's just kind of my take on these things.
Well, I hope more change continues. I know, like you said, the first colleges and universities that they're targeting are based on strong display of anti-Semitism, but I hope they can address some of the other issues such as admissions and hiring teachers and professors, in the diocese and that too. So let's hope the best. Let's hope for the best.
Yeah, and I'll say just real quickly that I've seen now, it seemed the administration started with a lot of the elite, top 10 universities, the Harvards, the Yales, the Northwesterns, and stuff like that. But we've seen a lot of activity, particularly recently. UVA is still what they call a public Ivy, but UCLA, you start to see, now that there's a lot of negotiations that are going on between the Trump administration quietly. Not only the Ivies and whatnot, but there's a tremendous staff that's at the Civil Rights Division of the Attorney General's office that they're having universities come forward and say, we messed up, or we don't want to be a target of this, that we're going to implement these kind of compliance things. So we're getting past the elites and the Ivies, and we're now starting to get into more of the kind of, the flagship public universities and perhaps even to some of the regional schools. So I think it was part of the tactic to, if you show that you can do it to Harvard and you show that you can do it to Yale and the most powerful institutions, then you can do it to, down the line and stuff like that. So I think we're starting to see a kind of cascading effect of compliance activities that are going to begin. So if you send your children to these universities, you're probably going to start to see some compliance. I will say that Illinois is not one of those states. They've been very recalcitrant. Their public institutions do not seem to want to do any anticipatory compliance. They do not want to do anything unless they are forced to, and it might, we'll see how it works out, but that's just kind of my thoughts on it. And, if you're interested in this, I post a lot of this on my Twitter and stuff like that, so just give me a follow up.
Stefan, can I just ask you an all or nothing question?
John, hold up for 1 second. Thanks, Steve. Thanks a lot for sharing all that information. John, I want to come to you right after Lips. Lips had his hand up for a while. Lips, go ahead.
So I just had a question for the professor. I actually had a couple questions, but one, when you talk about like DEI in colleges, I guess I have always wondered, you have a person and they fit a certain category, so they're allowed into college or they're allowed into a certain program, right? And I'm guessing, I'm really I don't know how to ask this, but they go to college and they're supposed to be there to learn. Do they learn? Or they just, like, they're unqualified from the beginning, and they continue to be unqualified throughout the course, you know what I mean?
Are you talking about the students or the faculty? I guess.
Either, I guess either. I wish I wasn't talking about both, but yeah, either one.
Yeah, I guess, in my own research for my case, and from my own personal experience, because, I was a professor at the University of Illinois Chicago before I moved to Northwestern. It's first of all, admissions, it's probably easier now to get into just about any university than it has probably ever been on all fronts, just because there's something known as the demographic cliff. So during the 2008, during the Great Recession, a bunch of people just decided, this is going to be one of the worst economic catastrophes, in history or something like that. So people just decided to hold off having kids, and within those kids are now hitting, like, people stopped, there's a 15% drop in birth rates in 2008, and now in 2025, there's a 15% drop in freshmen that are coming in. And then once you combine students who are maybe a little cautious of the new administration's changes to for international students and like that, you're seeing a pretty substantial drop in admissions. So you're finding it a lot easier to get in on all fronts, but particularly in the past, it was kind of a wink and a nod. I mean, you can get admitted to the program, but for undergraduate admissions, but Illinois has a tremendous number of illegal scholarships. One or two have already been smacked down in court, but just the idea that if you're, they state in the documents and on the websites, for a particular, they're for a particular race, which is patently unfair to students. So you might be able to get into a program, but depending on your race, is whether or not you're going to pay full sticker price, full in-state or out-of-state tuition versus having it completely free, and in some cases also having your living expenses and housing covered as well. So yeah, the student quality, research has shown that student quality has decreased, that the average kind of, about every metrics, high school GPA, standardized test score, overall IQ in students has just continued to decline. But yeah, we're exiting a period where the students who come are less prepared than the ones that preceded them, and that the faculty that are teaching them are not as good as the ones that preceded them as well. So it's kind of a difficult, it's an unfortunate type thing that I witnessed firsthand.
So do you think the follow-up is, do you think that any of, let's say that DEI hires or DEI students or whatever, does that ever produce productive at level or above level staff or students? Is it, you know what I mean? Does it ever, do those people ever make it to the level that the people who are actually qualified?
I mean, it's hard to say. I would say that a lot of first generation college students, which are a lot of the ones that have kind of benefited from the DI policy, tend to load into particular majors. Less likely to be in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, more likely to be in the social sciences and kind of business programs. So yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of great students that are coming out of there. Our universities, from a math statistical standpoint, that they're a little less qualified and a little less highly performing, a little less studious. And I can tell you, just with the onset of AI, it's I went from 3 years ago grading what was obviously written by people. I'm not talking about kind of across institutions. And now I have, I'm hearing from all sorts of colleagues, and I've seen a little bit of myself, just, generative AI, Grok, Claude, ChatGPT, all these open AI, is that we went from the beginning of the school year, it's like, you can't use AI, we have to teach you these things, to, all right, now we need to teach you how to use it. A lot of the papers and stuff that are being submitted across all sorts of universities are being AI generated, and I'm just like, what are you going to do if you can't provide value past what a generative AI can do? Then you're never going to find any stability in your professional life, because if AI can do your homework, then AI can do your job.
Yeah, I ask because we've all seen the memes of two women or two black guys or whatever flying an airplane, and they make a big deal about it. And somebody says, "Well, I'm not getting on that airplane." I've never cared the color, the race, the gender of my pilot, right? But when to me, it's like, does that, just because they got in for their DEI reason, does that mean that after schooling and everything that they're still useless? That are they qualified to be a pilot? Or any scenario, are they qualified? Because that's what really matters afterwards. They kind of nudge other people who should have been in that position to get where they're at, but are they actually qualified to do the job after all the schooling? And I'm not supporting DEI. I'm just wondering if there's any benefit to it whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a bit of a hot potato, but like my understanding, like DEI and sort of the policy structure that enabled it was intended to be used for very specific cases, and a specific context where there was kind of compelling national interest, and that there was often judicial oversight that was used to assure that things were not going out of pocket and stuff like that. So, but over the decades, just what has expanded, it expanded this kind of philosophy about what type of things. But I mean, the way I kind of look at it at DEI is, it's like, it was established in, by some of these presidents, disparate impact and other things back in the 60s. And these philosophies all the way back to 1964, but it's sort of emerged into this kind of shadow constitution that the norms of higher education and K through 12 education, that the culture of teachers unions and the culture of higher education administrators was standardized through conferences and journals and norms and whatnot, and just kind of created the shadow constitution where they just all basically agreed that we're going to interpret civil rights law in a particular way that didn't meet scrutiny, and it flew under the radar for so long. And now the shock that's happening to the system isn't, I don't believe there's any new laws that have been changed. There's not any new, there might be a few different, students or paraprofessions at Harvard versus Harvard in 2023. There's some court cases, but the shock that's coming is just basically this vibe shift that people are interpreting the law as it's written, not based on this kind of shadow constitution that's been and kind of common interpretation that's been promoted by professional organizations. So are there, I guess around that I'll close this out. There's good people everywhere. I've met a lot of decent students who come from all sorts of backgrounds and stuff like that. Personally, I'm a veteran. I served 6 years in the Army National Guard. I'm a fourth-generation veteran. I've seen what a model of colorblind equality looks like. When people, it seemed like we were really moving towards that in the 80s and early 90s. And then this kind of militant, postmodern, progressive kind of movement has kind of sought to undermine that. So yeah, there's good people everywhere. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but I think I'm kind of interested in the grand narratives of how these things came along, and I'm hoping that some of you are interested in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was asking only because, the industry I work in, I'm just going to be honest, sometimes we hire people who, when they originally get hired, I'm just like, I wouldn't trust this person to walk my dog, and 5 years into it, they're considered an expert, and they really are, and I just, I was just wondering, does that happen across the board, and especially in higher education? But my last question for you, and I'm sorry to take up so much time, but do you think that the Chicago Teachers Union and other teachers unions are, I know they're destroying politics in Chicago, but are they the ones that are destroying, I'll say, students? Are they the problem overall? Because I went to Chicago Public Schools. I was lucky enough to go to good enough schools where I didn't have, and I was semi-smart enough to do my homework and pay attention. But do you think that they're the ones encouraging? And I know you don't know the answer to how to stop them, but there's got to be a way to kind of reverse what they've been doing, right?
Yeah, I do disagree with my mom was a public school teacher. I kind of have that history of an educator in my background. So, what I've seen in Chicago is just a very different model that, this type of machine politics, that a lot of other cities in the United States, like San Antonio and Houston, Texas, and ones that were founded, past 1920, or were not, this kind of machine, strong mayor.
Okay, this is Roger.
He's kind of antecedent, kind of the old racial politics kind of model of machine politics that still persists here in Chicago, and that's very, very evident in the activities of the Chicago Teacher Union. And one thing I'm particularly concerned about CTU, and for somebody like, I was born in Illinois, but I grew up in North Carolina, Texas, and Florida. It's like coming to Illinois, I'm just like, yeah, this isn't the way you run things. Like, this is like, why are the Chicago Teacher Unions like they're getting involved in other domains of policy, like housing policy and immigration and debt service. It's very damaging to the finances of the state, because ultimately the state of Illinois has to act as the financial guarantor for Chicago if they're economically responsible. But it's like I've never seen something like this. Like seeing people from Chicago teachers unions at the Democratic Socialist conferences. This reactionary libertarian politics that began in the 1960s and continued under Bill Ayers. Like it's always been a point of contention to me. Like my dad, particularly, who was a Vietnam era veteran, he's just like when I joined UIC, he's like, Bill Ayers was a terrorist. That the Weather Underground killed like 4 people in bombings of New York Police headquarters and all these other places like that. And UIC hired him as a professor of education. And I was just always like, what kind of city has somebody who is an actual for real terrorist who bombed rural facilities and killed numerous people? The organization killed numerous people. Was on the run by FBI for 10 years and then goes to Columbia and then gets EDD and then becomes a professor at UIC, and just that same liberatory politics. And I'll say that's another thing about UIC that I posted on my account, is that UIC is a critical anchor of kind of reactionary politics in the city of Chicago. Remember that, I forgot the name of the guy, Rodriguez or something, the guy who shot those 2 innocent Jewish people in Washington, D.C. about a month or 2 ago.
Yeah.
Like generations of students have come to some of our universities, and they go into sociology and psychology and gender studies and ethnic studies programs that teach critical theory. They teach reactionary, libertarian, anti-colonial, anti-capitalism, all that other stuff like that. So we have this kind of confluence between our institutions that we're funding far left progressive political movements through taxpayer-funded dollars and calling it education. And I do hope that this administration does something about it. Like, my own case notwithstanding, that's not something that's perhaps directly germane to my program, but it's something I've talked about. It's just like, as a veteran, what do I do when I'm a faculty member and I come to a school where people are teaching, destruction of the West and anti-capitalism and taking things down by force and anti-Semitism and stuff like that. It's like our public institutions should not be funding these things. And I say credit to the Trump administration for actually working to remove the funding. We're tired. If you want to have crazy political beliefs, fund it on your own dime. Oh, that's right, you don't have your own dime because it's all taxpayer funded. So cut the head off at the source, the hydra, and it will stop growing back.
I appreciate it. Like I said, I know a couple people who work for colleges. They're not professors. They work in the college, and they're very. They tell me all the time that they don't know what the hell. I have a friend who works at Purdue, and there's a a room where college students can go like color stuff if they're like triggered. And I'm just like, what the fuck is happening in college? You know what I mean? Like, but I feel like it's rooted somewhere. Like places, the CT, I focus on the CTU guys. Obviously, I'm from Chicago, and I went to CPS. But like, there has to be other public school systems that are just as insane as CTU.
Yeah, in Los Angeles, New York, all the usual suspects, pretty much. But yeah, I just if you go after the funding, these things will disappear. But like it's just a challenge. But I think this the funding environment that's hitting some of the public universities. There's this dissension between faculty because there's the humanities and social sciences and the arts, and then there's like the STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And the people who bring in the big money and the people who really want to just bear down, do science, develop new technologies, aerospace and computer science and all the other stuff like that, they're starting to hit really hard up against the crazies, which are in a lot of the social science departments, who are the ones that are doing all this. And the universities are like, well, the people doing this political protesting, they're not bringing in $5 million National Science Foundation grants, and they're not bringing in $20 million NIH grants. If you want the institution to survive, you better understand where your bread is buttered, where your money's coming from. And second of all, it's like the people who are creating the maximum exposure to the institutions are the crazies who are doing all this anti-Semitic stuff. They're doing all their kind of far left politics and stuff like that. So I think there's kind of a come to Jesus movement that's coming up in academia saying, look, we're not going to sacrifice the entirety of an academic institution, its reputation and its function in society so that you can use this as your postmodern far left political platform, for taxpayer-funded activism. And I'm happy to see that come to a close. I don't know if my career is going to be able to withstand that era, but if it does, great. If not, I'll just be happy to see what emerges from on the other side of this.
I appreciate you taking the time to answer.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I want to make sure I'm not taking too much of the time off from any sort of designated speakers or anything like that.
No, you're good, Stephen. I appreciate all your answers, and I'm really happy and encouraged to hear that there's also voice from within the colleges that's coming, to reason, and not just this administration. So, that gives me a little bit slightly higher hope than what I have right now. So that's good to hear. John.
Oh yeah, I want to say quickly. I'll say I don't have tenure. I was a non-tenured faculty member, and I stood up for this, and I paid the price for doing what is supposed to be normal academic governance. But ultimately, if we're going to have tenure, we're going to need to get those tenured professors. And I think that the dam is broken, the social taboo is broken, that people are starting to stand up now and publicly on social media and stuff saying it's like, what we did was insane. We can't have science and basic forms of scientific progress that operate under some of these kind of domains. So I'm happy to see people come forward, but man, it's a scary place being way out on the tip of the spear of it. So.
Hey, Stefan,
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Stefan,
John.
Yeah, Stefan, I've really enjoyed everything you've said. I think you're hitting all the nails on the head. And I can tell that, you're a good professor, and whatever your students, I'm sure, are very lucky and fortunate, and they, you sound like a caring person. I've been doing online social audio conversations and debates for the past 5 years, and I use this app called Clubhouse, and we talk to a lot of what they self-describe as liberal, populist, Democrat socialists, or there's a lot of anarchists in these apps. So my question to you, and this is a question I always like to ask people on the far left or the far right, if you were made king of the world, or let's say the governor of Illinois, let's just start at the governor of Illinois. This is like an all or nothing question. If you were the governor of Illinois, what would be your top 3 priorities for we the people?
Within the domain of education, deregulation, or?
No, it's an all or nothing question. You know, you're the top dog, the number one guy in Illinois. You're the governor. What are your list of priorities for we the people?
Okay, so people, like, I guess what the standard things about, like, economic liberty and security, but it's like, I mean, we're the very bottom, I believe, at or near the bottom in job creation. That's really looking at, well, I think first it's like right-sizing government. I think that we have a tremendous drain that a lot of the policies that are kind of wrapped around, I guess, the economics, the things that are killing business creation and business development is the high tax burden and regulatory compliance burden. Everything from permitting, taxes, to just red tape and graft and corruption and whatnot. So to promote greater prosperity and wealth, and to start end this hemorrhaging of population loss. We're surrounded by 3 states that are growing in population and have, added hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of jobs. Whereas we do that. So, like, I think, the number one priority is just like right-sizing government, kind of deregulatory, sort of, I guess, a deregulatory approach to removing some of the structural things that are impeding economic development. Let's see, number 2, I'm also not, like, the linkages between these different policy areas. Like, I'm involved in the higher ed space, but the problem with that links us to our economic development problems is like something like 15 or 50% of people who go off to university leave the state of Illinois because, our tuition in-state is higher than out-of-state tuition in a lot of places in the country. So you have students, I think the number one destination for Illinois students outside of Illinois is Auburn, then like the University of Kansas and Iowa and Nebraska. And when those people go to college, they don't come back. So we've had very minor population growth in Illinois, but our population growth has mostly come from immigration, and particularly not what people consider legal immigration. So we're replacing high wage growth. We're replacing our residents, long-term multi-generational residents with multi-generational wealth and advanced degrees, and the ones that are really kind of the gold standard for economic development, and we're replacing them with low-skilled, unskilled, ones that have a higher degree of dependence on the state. And until we get tuition down, Purdue, somebody mentioned Purdue earlier. I read earlier today, Purdue has not upped tuition in 14 years. If they have a balanced budget amendment, they are required by law to balance their budget each year. I would, I guess that might even be going into my third point. Is like, it'd be a really heavy lift to do in Illinois given the political dynamics, but having a balanced budget amendment and controlling the growth of the state. But it's like a lot of these costs that are associated with keeping tuition high are paying for all these wraparound services, for all these sinecures, for all these kind of, using the university system as a job creation mechanism. And I can tell you from when I was a faculty member at UIC, I believe,
Restart the slide.
Our budget was only, the departments and colleges, some of them only get like 4 or 5% of their budget from state appropriations. It's almost all tuition driven, which is why we've had to be dependent on international students. And now that international students are not necessarily wanting to come to the U.S. to study, so I guess it's a combination of deregulation and addressing the job killing regulations, helping to end the brain drain due to the high cost of tuition and the tremendous kind of administrative load that is driving our most talented and multi-generational wealth out of the state, and then a balanced budget initiative that kind of goes back to that same concept of right-sizing government and enforcing fiscal discipline. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
That's awesome. You're ready for common sense politics, Stephen.
I feel like I should run for something at some point.
I was going to say that myself.
Yeah, I kind of get into like this. I call it TED Talk mode when I'm chatting on some of these things without having prompts. But yeah, I have a pretty good understanding of most areas of policy and things like that. But it's just like I was born in Illinois. I've lived other places and I have kind of a comparative perspective. But it's just like this isn't how state government runs. That even if we kind of align with progressive values, that like we can't have one side of one aspect of society just using the other as its piggy bank and just demanding more and more and deciding stuff. So like there's going to have to be something. I think we're kind of getting to that point. There's going to be either a taxpayer revolt or the city or the state is going to have to declare financial exigency, and discipline is going to have to be imposed through agencies of the federal government because we don't have the capacity or the responsible people who are kind of currently in charge of the institutions who are willing to take the political risk to right size everything.
I fully agree. I think we're getting there. John, I'm going to go to you now. I know you introduced yourself briefly. I had a few questions for you. One thing I wanted to know was how did you said you live in Chicago, right? So how did you decide to run for position in District 16 out of all places?
Yeah, so I live in Chicago. I was born in Chicago. My dad was a cop for 30 years in this city. And I ran as committee man in Jefferson Park here in Chicago. And that's when I had my first taste of Chicago or Cook County GOP politics. And, I'm a veteran. I've been through a lot in my life. And I got to tell you, getting sued by the Cook County GOP and going through that whole experience of getting pushed off the ballot and seeing a committee person get installed, that's what triggered me and made me realize that these little cliques and these little clubs are not inclusive. And so having met people through that organization, I was encouraged to run against Darren LaHood as a good strategic option. Other people told me to run in other districts, but it's my belief that even looking at Darren LaHood's analytics or replies or retweets or comments, he doesn't have a very engaged group of constituents and voters. So to me, he's somebody that I could, theoretically knock off and, become the Republican congressperson of that district. I'm setting up debates with the Democratic candidates because I want to see what their economic theories and policies are and whether they're frugal and fiscally conservative. So to me, Darren LaHood is one of the worst offenders when you look at how much debt he has voted for and created. And using grok and going through congressional acts is incredible. And he's raised over $10 million from health insurance companies, big pharma, Verizon, AT&T, Comcast. He's a big pusher of rural broadband, spending another $100 billion there. So to me, we have to stop borrowing and stop spending. It's pretty common sense. It's very practical and pragmatic. And as Stefan just said, without a balanced budget and generating $5 trillion a year in taxes and spending $7 trillion when you already have $37 trillion, it's not sustainable. In 2050, we'll be $50 trillion in debt and paying $4 trillion a year on the national interest. So the time is now in order to get our fiscal conservatism and prudent fiscal policies into place. We can't keep borrowing and spending. So this is why I'm running primarily.
Okay. And I understand that, and yeah, I respect your thoughts on it, but Darren LaHood, I think this is his third or fourth term, right? And it seems like he's got a very strong base in his district. So you're saying that your advisors have told you that is still the place that
No, it's not advisors. You just look at his X account, his Instagram account. He's got no real constituents. I'm saying it's a paper tiger. He just based on the analytics. But listen, I understand it's a big network of people.
I'm sorry. I'm not talking about social media analytics. I'm talking about the votes that he got, and historically, right? So
Well, that's not
have you looked
Listen,
And,
the principle why I'm running is I believe there should be 10 challengers against Darren LaHood in the Republican Party. There should be 10 challengers in the Democrat Party. There's nobody running. This guy is going to run unopposed. So if we really want to make Illinois great again and make America great again, we need thousands of people getting more activated and involved in running in politics. It's not that hard to do. You may lose, I may lose. That's not the point. The principle is we are so far into debt, and Darren LaHood for 10 years has created this debt. In my opinion, as an Illinois resident, a lifelong Illinoisan and Chicagoan, I mean, it's my duty and responsibility to do this. It's not some advisors or advisor. The point is, I'm doing this for me, and I'm doing this for the people in the 16th district in the state of Illinois and for America, because as everybody knows, we're going to $50 trillion in debt. And as I said, that'll be a $4 trillion a year interest payment. We're only taking in $5 trillion a year in taxes. Does Darren LaHood care about that? Does he talk about that all the time? The guy does photo ops and social media propaganda in the same way that AOC does. I respect the guy, and I'm sure he's a wonderful man and father and husband, but in terms of debt creation, he is a hypocrite. He's got to go. And a lot of people in Illinois got to go. You live here, I live here. It's run like clown world. Darren is a participant in clown world. See that photo with Ron Paul in my PTR? I helped him with his campaign in California because I believe in fiscal conservatism. The government is broke, and we just keep kicking the can down the road. Darren LaHood is a professional can kicker. I am not. I want to smash that can and recycle it. I'm complete. Thanks for letting me speak.
okay, anybody from 16th district here have any questions for John? You can come up and request to speak. Red Pill, I see you requested to speak. Did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, hello, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Hello, everybody. I live in the 15th district of Illinois, and I wanted to report in something very interesting that happened. I grew up in the 15th district, lived in Chicago for 20 years, and then came back here. I live in a small town of 550 people along Highway 36, kind of in between Decatur and Champaign. And this little town was a disaster during the pandemic. We had all kinds of crime here, and the village board was run by a bunch of elderly, aging Democrats. And they were very unpopular. The town was very upset. And one by one, they started leaving the board or retiring. And one by one, we replaced them with MAGA Republicans, and the small village now has a brand new board and a brand new village board president. The whole group is of a Republican mindset, and we are going to fix this little town. And just like a small town perspective is helpful, because sometimes you're in such a big city, you see so many people, you lose sight of these things. But in a town of 550 people, the Democrats who were in charge here were fining everyone and treating it like a homeowners association. If your grass is 2 inches too tall, you're getting a fine. And they, if you don't pay your water bill exactly on time, your water bill shut off, you're fined $400. Like, things that were absolutely outrageous, and people were leaving this town, and I can't blame them, because it was turning into a very bad place, crime out of control, things like that. And we're going to fix this town. We have to build a new water tower eventually. But the woman who was the village clerk, she, also a Democrat, left stacks of unpaid bills for the next people. And they're having to do all kinds of things. But I am joining this village board. I'm very proud and very happy. And we've got to flip Illinois red from the bottom to the top. And I read everybody's posts. I'm just very glad to be here, and I don't get out much because it's a small town, not like I used to when I lived in good old Chicago, and I could just go to any restaurant and museum anytime I wanted to. I'm a little more isolated now, but I read everybody's posts on here and try to retweet as much as I can. But it's just good to hear like the different perspective, because this is a different world. You know, I lived in Chicago for 20 years. I know that world, but coming back home to my hometown was a big adjustment. And I got stuck here during the pandemic, but there's going to be a resurgence in this state, and I think MAGA needs to understand that Illinois is not a blue state. Illinois is a red state that needs to be liberated, and that's pretty much what I wanted to say.
Great, thanks a lot for coming up, and thanks for sharing that success story. That does give us all a little bit more hope. I think the difference is that, you know, being a smaller town, people felt the impact directly, right? And there was less gaslighting that happens constantly, you know, through media and everything, where, you know, people are feeling one thing, but they're told to believe in something else, right? And here, you felt it directly, and you took responsibility and took charge and made the change. So that's really good to hear. And I thank you for all your engagement. I do see that you're always engaged within the community, with everybody. So thanks for everything.
Yeah, you too.
Kyle, how's it going?
Another day on this side of the dirt, my friend. So, a quick question for John. Well, one, nice talking to you again. Joining you in your little book club earlier today. Question: what is not the message? Because the message you have is correct. But what steps are you taking in terms of contact with like precinct committee men, people on the ground? What's your plan of attack to actually defeat Lowitt? And again, just with ACDC's point, with him having such a big backing, be it good or bad, irrelevant on the point, what's your plan of attack to actually defeat him? And I agree with you, there needs to be more people. You know, the fact you're a Ron Paul fan, you know, man after my own heart. But more or less, I guess I'm just looking for the semantics that you have planned or laid out that you're currently working on or need help with, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I ran for committeeman here in Chicago, I hired people from the south side off of Craigslist to gather signatures for me. I gathered, I don't know, 700 or 1,200 signatures. It took me 30 days to gather all the signatures. When I got sued and I looked at Stella Richards, the woman who ran against me, they generated her signatures in one day, and the ballots were so perfect, it looks like nobody ever even touched them. So my strategy is to get the amount of signatures to get on the ballot for the March primary. It's going to be a lot of work. I live in the northwest side of Chicago. I can hire people through Craigslist to generate these signatures for me, but I'll tell you, the people that gather signatures for you, it's a challenge to get them to affordably get these signatures created. But I'm going to try to recruit political activists from the left and from the right to help me get the signatures. That's the whole goal. If I can get on the ballot, that's a big win for me. He's got $10 million to advertise to the 16th district. And he's going to spend that money. Yesterday, he re-announced that he's definitely running. So I live in Chicago. I see Krishnamurti ads nonstop. They have an